And hit record. We are live.
I'd like to call the Finance Committee meeting for March 17th, 2021 to order. Members present are Ms. Earlston, Mr. Ivy, and Tom Fellner. If we've had a chance to read the minutes from the February 17th meeting, if there are no additions or corrections, I'd like a motion to approve those minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from.
Ms. Earlston makes the motion, seconded by Mr. Ivy. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries and the minutes for February 17th regular meeting are approved. We got a updated agenda this evening. If there are no further additions or corrections, I'd like a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
I'll make the motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Mr. Ivy makes the motion.
And I'll second that.
Ms. Earlston seconds. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries and the agenda is approved. First discussion item is entitled WSRLA Planning Loan Ordinance 2021-24. I don't know if that was a radio station or stands for something else, but I would like either Mr. Baldinger or Mr. O'Leary to take the lead on this one.
Yeah, I believe that's got something to do with the 598 project or something along those lines. So I believe
Nope.
Mr. O'Leary would be the one.
I'll jump in, and this is the ultimate hot potato, if you will. This is really, Nikki is the best person to answer questions. It has with hiring an engineering firm to do some planning for infrastructure improvements at the water plant. But beyond that, I'll let Nikki detail it out or answer any questions you may have.
Ms. Ward?
Like Tom said, this is to get a general plan put together for the water system. The EPA requires this in order for us to be eligible to apply for big loans for the massive infrastructure projects we'll be doing. So this is going to be likely a 0% loan because we are a disadvantaged community. So that's, with the first project, we can roll this number into that project. But again, we can't apply for any real loans until we have this all completed. And we did get 3 different proposals. We did make the application for the highest proposal because at that time we weren't sure which firm we're going to go with, but I don't think the application will be for that full amount.
Could you tell us what the amount is?
I think it'll be more along $25,000, so a couple $1,000 less than we had anticipated.
Okay, and so just to try and summarize, this is a loan to get some engineering done?
To put together basically a 10-year plan for the water system.
All right. And who is the loaner?
The EPA.
Okay.
And this is actually a revolving loan fund that we're getting this money from.
Okay. And you said that we could roll this 25,000 approximately, roll it into a future first loan once we get this study taken care of?
Correct. So, the EPA wants to know we're going about these upgrades and repairs in a systematic way. So once we get this plan in place and we've decided what the next course of action is, I assume we'll be making application for a loan to help with that project. And this $25,000 can be rolled into that first loan, yes.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
want to add, this is an option. I think what we want to do, there really wasn't a provision for this in the existing budget. This is a way to get the process moving. So we'll take a look at this. What we want to do is be able to have that tool to use to go ahead and apply for it. We may in the before a contract to sign and the study commences, we may use our existing resources and hold off on incurring any more debt, even if it's zero interest. So it really needed to get this going with council, and that's really why it's here tonight, to get on the agenda and have a little bit of time if council wants to ask questions about it.
Nikki, where is the engineering firm from?
Marion,
Okay,
it's
We're
a
gonna-
group we used for lots of our water projects. So they're familiar with the system and familiar with, potential needs.
CT is the name. That sort of got staticked out. So that's who we've used on a handful of other water and wastewater projects.
Ms. Earlston or Ms. Ivy, Ms. Ivy, Mr. Ivy? Any
No, I was
questions?
just, the only question I had, the mayor just answered. I was simply going to ask, why are we in a position that we need to take out a loan for this? But I think he answered that sufficiently. And I guess that I was just going to ask, is this an anomaly? Is this something that, is standard in previous finance committees on previous councils? But I think the mayor answered my question sufficiently enough. Thank you.
We were just, Aaron, we were just talking about that
Mhm.
3 minutes, Nikki and I, 2 or 3 minutes before the meeting. This is probably not, if you went back, most of the time we've hired engineering firms to do studies or develop specific sets of plans. We've gone ahead and hired them. Like I said, and it's a tool, but we'll need council's permission to go ahead and apply for the loan.
Okay.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions or comments, I'd like to hear a motion to pass ordinance 2021-24 onto full council.
I'll make a motion to pass ordinance 2021-24 onto full council.
Ms.
I'll
Earlston
second.
makes the motion and Mr. Ivy seconds. All in favor? Aye. Motion carries, and ordinance 2021-24 will be heard on Tuesday at full council. Next item on the agenda is ordinance 2021-27, an updated credit card policy. So I'm gonna turn this over to Mr. Baldinger and Ms. Colleen and to
Okay,
really
thanks,
point
Tom. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, this policy is going to take council back about a year when we put this in place. And when we did this back, it was actually March 25th last year. It was ordinance number 2020-15. It put a cap on the credit card policy of $5,000. And also we never selected a compliance officer for this. So, and Chief Jackson came to me a week or two ago. He's got money back. He needs to do some renovations in the fire department, mainly in the kitchen area for his employees. And he's not able to buy any supplies because of this cap. When the cap was put on, the current Lowe's account was over the $5,000 limit. So we didn't close the account, but we did put a hold on the account. And the account is not usable as long as that $5,000 cap's on there because we keep exceeding it. And we need to get that removed and then select the compliance officer. And then just a few days ago, he come into the office, and he's also got to renew a pharmacy license that applies to him with the squad and the city health department. This license requirement is not a super large expense, but it's like $450 or $500 range. And the only payment that they will accept is credit card. They will not accept any other payment. They won't accept check. They won't accept anything else but credit card. So, so we need to get this resolved, and it's more and more every year. More and more things is changing towards to where we need this credit card policy. So if Eunice has anything else, she can step in at this point, or I'll turn it back over to Council.
I'll just add in and clarify, the fire department's fee is about $450. The health departments will be, in addition to that, they have 2 separate pharmacy license. With the pandemic currently going on, normally this would be due by the end of this month, but they have done an extension to July 1st. I believe it is July 1st or at the end of July. I think it's July
that's what they're
1st.
doing is July 1st.
Yeah,
So if
I've
I
got
could
the
ask,
paperwork
sorry.
here. But if they do not have this in place, they cannot dispense any medication. They can't do oxygen, nothing.
Dr. Fellner, if I may ask a question. So are we talking about 2 separate issues here? One being a Lowe's account that needs a credit card cap removed to $5,000, and then a application for a second credit card for the health department and the fire department for their pharmacy renewal?
Aaron, the Lowe's account is a credit card.
Right,
and it
right.
falls
So
under-
we just want to
it falls
remove
under
the
this
cap from that.
policy. And it falls within this policy.
Mhm.
The state requires us to have a credit card policy if we have any credit cards.
Okay. Does this have anything to do with the vote from last year? Or I just want to get, just have a complete understanding and a clear picture here, because I remember it went down 4-3 in full council, I believe. Or am I thinking about something totally different, Gail?
I think you're right. I think you're right on. It did go down. We didn't get a chance to revisit this and continue on trying to rectify the problem, because I think it was set aside because of COVID for one thing. And but it's getting to where we really need to get one
Right.
in place.
So if we allocate and approve the removal of the $5,000 cap, do you have an idea or a suggestion of will there be a new cap put into place on that Lowe's card, or are we?
Eunice
Well,
knows
and-
more how that works, because each individual department would have their own cap that would fluctuate. And I can't tell you exactly what those caps would be, and I don't know if Eunice can tell you the exact amounts either, but they would be separate, because each department has different uses for the card. So each department would have different amounts. And the other thing is, it's my understanding the application for this is going to be through Park National Bank, and they have very strict guidelines. It's almost probably council's probably not real familiar with our VIP system, but there's all kinds of checks and balances there. It's like anytime there's a charge made on the card, the department supervisor will be notified immediately, and then other people also, probably the compliance officer, and I don't know what all will be contacted. So we'll know at all times when the card is being used, because of the compliances that they'll have on there. Eunice has got a little better knowledge on that also, because she's been dealing with Park on that. So
It's actually just like we proposed when the first time that we presented this. It is called an L&1 card through Park National Bank. As far as the credit limit, it is our thought that we would set limits for the departments. However, I want to make it very clear that with the policy set up like it is, we would be able to fluctuate with those if needed in emergencies. So that, like, if something happened and let's say one department had a $2,000 credit limit, and something happened that they needed it raised to $3,000 or something, we would be able to go online and do that. We could then change it back down after the situation is resolved. The bank has, like Gail was saying, there are all kinds of points of control on this. Just to try, maybe you guys aren't aware, but just to try and give you an example, when we do transfers online with the bank or electronic payments, there are points of control that, like, April has to have payroll approved. When I pay AMP for our electric usage, I can't just go on and do that. I have to have another person approve it. It's not just one shot and you're done. There are notifications that you set that go out so that anytime it's swiped, different people are notified. The policy provides where reports are given. As Gail was also saying, and I don't know if anybody wants to see it, but I've printed out like our software, because so many people are moving to credit cards. Our software literally has where you post if it's a credit card payment. They do specific reports for credit card payments. There, and as well as the reports that we would be able to access with the Ellen card online through Park National. So we would be able to basically reconcile the report from our software system with the bank to make sure that everything equals up and is as it should be.
Thank you
I
very much.
definitely- Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry,
Gary.
Dr. Feld.
No,
No,
go
I was
ahead.
just going to say, I remember I was in favor of this last year, and primarily for some of the reasons that were just given. I mean, with the way that technology is moving forward, and I feel even better about it this year because of the safeguards that Eunice, that you just described. So Dr. Fellner, and Ms. Earlston, I really don't have any issue with this. Primarily, I think a lot of it was just a little bit of apprehension. Like I said last year, if I recall, it was voted down 4-3. So, with the safeguards and, people just aren't operating with PO numbers anymore for the most part in many of these different venues. And I think it is important to have a credit card on the back burner just in case we get into these emergencies. So that's all I have to say, Dr. Fellner. Thank you.
Ms. Earlston.
And if I remember correctly, this was going to save us money, correct, Eunice? In the long run.
In some instances, yes, it will save us money. Just to elaborate a little bit more on what Mr. Ivy was saying as well, it's not just that they don't operate on PO anymore, especially we're finding with the state offices, they're still working remotely. They don't have anybody in the office, so you cannot mail a check. If they're not set up to receive electronic checks, they're going to credit cards because there's no other way to receive the money. Our loans that we just paid with OWDA is a good example. We've always paid that by check. They no longer accept checks because they have no one in the office to receive and deposit the checks.
I am in agreement with Mr. Ivy. I remember it was a pretty heated discussion for 3 readings, as I recall, before it was defeated. And the primary, as I recall, there were 2 issues. One with accountability, which I think Mr. Baldinger and Ms. Colleen have all but guaranteed, I mean, without a rock solid guarantee, that there's going to be checks and balances. And if something is amiss, somebody's going to know right away. And I think the other issue was the past 1995 era abuses of the credit card that contributed to somewhat of the financial difficulties that the city faced. And I think those have been eliminated with stricter banking controls and things like that. So I would like to hear a motion to pass this on to full council.
I'll make the motion, Dr. Fellner, to move ordinance 2021-5 onto full council.
27.
27, my apologies.
No worries. Mr. Ivy makes the motion.
And I will second that.
Ms. Earlston seconds. And all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries, and 2021-27 will be discussed at full council. Third item, state infrastructure bank loan. So Mr. O'Leary or I'm betting Ms. Ward.
Thanks, Doc. I want to refresh folks' memories about how the budget was done. I know it was just a few months ago, but there is in the revenue side of Fund 201, $850,000 that would be brought into the galleon budget through a state infrastructure bank loan. Okay. It's a vehicle, it'll work. It's a tool that will work, but we continue to work on other ways to substitute that 3% money. That's the cost of borrowing at the SIB for lower interest or no interest borrowing. So that if you will, plan A is to use a SIB to borrow the difference between what the likely estimated cost of the Portland Way project is and the gap. It's about $820,000. So that's the option going into the budget. There's enough spending authority on the expenditure side. The revenue that balances or provides for that spending is that loan. So what I want to do is discuss with council kind of a few months away from the budget where you've got dozens, if not hundreds of numbers, you know, sort of running through your mind, a couple of other alternatives. We are not up against the absolute deadline on deciding how much we want to borrow versus how much we would use other city resources for. So plan A is to borrow the roughly $25,000 to $850,000 from the SIB at 3%. One other feature is that the payments on that type of loan start a year after the facility is open. So sometime in 2023, the payments for that loan would begin to be due. That'd help us plan for it. It'd kick the can down the road. There's 2 or 3 different ways you can look at it. Plan B is a combination of that, in which we would borrow less from the state infrastructure bank and either use unappropriated general fund dollars or allocate some of the appropriated but unassigned or unspecified capital improvement fund dollars. So alternative to borrowing 850 would be to borrow 400,000 or 500,000 and take the balance of that either from the capital improvements fund or from the, as I said a minute ago, unappropriated general fund. The third thing is falls into the category, if you will, of nothing ventured, nothing gained, and that involves our request of the Ohio Public Works Commission to allocate to this project additional funding in those loans at OPWC are 0 interest loans. It certainly would be a lot better for the city that you don't have the deferral on that. You begin to have to pay for the cost of that sooner than later. But it's when you look at the interest rate difference, that much money, 3% versus 0 interest, it certainly makes pursuing this third option worth a try. So I hope by the end of the week to either say we absolutely have a great chance with the OPWC, that option 3, or there were no funds available, or probably another alternative is that while we had asked for 800,000 of those issue 1 OPWC dollars, we may not be that fortunate, but we may get some money. So it's a big expenditure. I wanted to run it by finance, get some feedback about whether or not this group wanted to go ahead and go as planned, borrow the money from the SIB and stop looking at various options, or reduce that SIB loan with other city resources, or certainly I think if we could get to get some or part of the gap filled with the OPWC, then we would do that. So those are the three options. I just wanted to sort of refresh this committee's memory and decide whether or not there's interest in depleting some of the reserve funds and borrowing a little bit less for this major project.
Are you going to pursue the OPWC?
Yeah, I didn't want to bug them. I realize times have changed, and the idea of calling somebody 2 or 3 times in the afternoon to get an answer is, you know, generally I've learned now that if you want an answer, I'll give you one. It's no. So I'd hope to have more direct rather than just the conceptual layout, the option. I hope by Friday we're going to know whether we have a chance to get this lower interest. Another cool thing about that is it's likely to allow us to borrow the money for a little bit longer than the infrastructure bank would. So we may get 12 years at 0 interest. That really levels out the payment, and you always think about future years. You don't want to crowd out paving in future years, you know, for one big project. So anyway, that's what I got.
Well, I mean, just from the way it sounds, the preferred way is to let OPWC do its thing, say yes or no, and then look at filling in the gap with. I would prefer city funds if that's available. I mean, if it's a fair chunk of money knocked off of that 825,000 and not go into another debt. But if not, then I don't want to hurt the general fund irreparably. So the loan would be obviously the SIB loan is going to be a good option for us too.
Yeah, thanks. I think it is. I think all three work. You know, sometimes you look at emails and you get so many and you don't read. So I just looked at this one. It basically announced to communities in this 17 county area that we're part of that they had quite a bit actually of leftover loan money. And so that's really why we started to pursue it. So it's a little bit, it's kind of a new idea, a new way to do it. The other thing, if I might, Doc, that I'd want to say, we still have some time. I want to, there is no plan that is agreed on. I have an idea in my own mind what uses we could put the capital improvements fund money to. I'm comfortable, we were comfortable last year to use some of it to help round out that paving project. I think that's a good precedent. I think, you know, the idea of using it to assist us in some other big projects is a good idea. But by the time Mosier pays, there'll be a pretty significant amount of funding there. And I guess what I'm suggesting is now is probably the time to begin to think a little bit about what we want to do with those capital improvement funds. So that's all I've got to add on that. You know, they're going to be between $500,000 and depending on whether we use them here, it's money in the bank. It's the rainy day fund, if there is such a thing, limited to capital projects. It's nice to have that, but I think it's also good to have a plan when we're talking about some major capital improvements around the city.
Okay. Next item are the financials. First item under financials are amending 2021 appropriations, ordinance 2021-25. Gail?
I'm going to refer to Eunice on that. I think that's some of the new amended
Mhm.
agenda for tonight.
There's a lot in this.
Okay,
That too.
Okay. I'll go through these fairly quickly, and then if you guys have questions, we can definitely come back and revisit them. Section 2 is appropriating $20,000 to unclaimed funds. This is cash that's already in there. April had sent out approximately 300 letters to people that we have unclaimed funds. For whatever reason, nothing has been done with this for quite some time in our office. And she has been working on it gradually when time permits, and she was able to send out letters. We're getting some response to those letters, and we'll have some requests to reissue some of those payments. So the $20,000 is just to assure that we have enough money to pay the requests that come in. Section 3 is to appropriate money for the Convention and Visitors. This is money that goes to Experience Galleon, money from the bed taxes that come into that fund, just to refresh everybody's memory, or if you're not familiar. Section 4, 5, and 6, I'm going to kind of combine all those because they're all related. So section 4 is to appropriate funds into a transfer line in 625. We are appropriating the full balance of 625. This was borrowed money that was for the electric improvement. As long as there is a balance in that fund, it is earning interest. The fund has been dormant for a while, and we need to get that money out of there and use it. However, it can only be used for qualifying expenses since it was borrowed money. So section 5 then transfers that money from the transfer in 625 into a revenue line of 605, being just our electric operating fund. Section 6 then appropriates that money from the electric operating fund into the debt service line, because we would like to use the balance of that to pay down the debt service that is in 605. This is where that money was used for and where our debt payments are made from. So we need to logistically move the money into 605 so that we can make that debt payment. So that's what all three of those sections involve. Section 7 is to reduce appropriations in the freeze fund. As much as we went through the budget, I think we were probably all about cross-eyed. However, in reconciling the amended certificate, we are way over budgeted in there, and we're not sure how or where the figure came from, but we need to reduce the appropriations in 405 by the amount shown there, the $438,088. That'll bring us into compliance and balance the amended certificate for the freeze fund. Section 8 is to transfer $75,000 from the general fund into Port Authority. That was already budgeted into the transfer line in the general fund. We just need to now move the cash into 409 to be able to make the payment to the Port Authority. So that is, in a nutshell, what all those are. I just do want to touch and elaborate that as the year progresses, we had conversation with the mayor. We know that we have some funds to watch. We may have to come back to do additional amendments for the amended certificate. We will also be having some fund creation and movement for the health department for grants. Just kind of ran out of time for all of that stuff. So that'll still be coming yet.
questions or comments? Eunice, thank you very much. I'm sure you'll be repeating that definition on Tuesday night.
You didn't memorize it?
Almost. Maybe I'll have it down.
Dr. Feldman,
Yes, Mr. Ivy.
I'm sorry, Eunice, would you be kind enough just to review section 7 again and just pretend like it's Cliff Notes for Dummies for me? I don't truly have a grasp on what's going on with the Freeze Center and the 438,000. Can you explain that, please?
This doesn't have anything to do with the Freeze Center.
Or the
Um,
freeze, I'm
these are
sorry.
projects that we're looking at, okay?
Okay,
So our amended certificate takes our balance as of the end of December 2020, deducts the encumbrances that we already have in place. So for example, we had 2 projects that carried over. So we have to have the funding in place for the netting at Pico and the slide
oh,
at the park. So then we deduct those from our carryover balance, add in our expected revenue, and that gives us basically the funds available for appropriation. We appropriated $980,088 into the freeze fund at the beginning of the year for the budget, and that's not what we meant to do. So this
All right.
corrects that for the amended certificate.
light bulb just went off. Thank you.
It's for the anticipated freeze projects for this year.
I understand now. Thanks for the clarification.
Okay, could I hear a motion to move ordinance 2021-25 onto full council?
I'll make the motion, Dr. Fellner.
Mr. Ivy makes the motion. Mrs. Earlston seconds. I read your lips. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 3-0. Next item under financials is a new fund creation, I'm assuming, ordinance 2021-26.
That's probably going to be Eunice again.
Aye.
Of course.
Okay, so this is creating, and I don't have a copy in front of me, 418, Julie, is that correct? Fund 418?
Yes.
Okay, so we're creating Fund 418 to be the street improvements or the urban paving. And this is a result, if you recall back at one time, 409 was urban paving. But at some point, somebody said that it was misnamed and it was changed in the system. In preparing for our gap this year and the records that the state auditors requested, that was an error and that should not have been changed. So we're going to be working on cleaning that up as we reconcile our gap for 2020. So 418 will now be our urban paving, and there will be more activity from you guys where we need approval for corrections and stuff to come down the road. But the state auditors asked that I at least get this fund set up and created in the system, so we're ready for that.
Is Fund 409 still in existence?
Fund 409 has been relabeled as the Port Authority.
Very good. Thank you.
Yes.
Questions or comments? May I have a motion to forward ordinance 2021-26 on the full council, please?
I'll make a motion to pass ordinance number 2021-26 on to full council.
Ms.
I'll
Earlston
second.
makes the motion and Mr. Ivy seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carries, and that ordinance will be discussed on full council on Tuesday. Is there any other business for finance? If not, the next finance meeting, the regularly scheduled finance meeting is April 21st at 7 p.m. I'd like a motion for adjournment, please.
I'll make a
Ms.
motion to
Wilson makes the
adjourn.
motion for adjournment.
I'll
Mr.
second.
Ivy seconds, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries and meeting is adjourned at 7:39.
Can we take 2 minutes, please, before we move on?
Yes, the next
Certainly.
is scheduled to start at 7:45, so you have a
Thank
few
you.
minutes.
Thanks, Julie.
Mhm. Stop recording, but we still are live.
No.
Just let everyone know that still that is watching, we will be starting the committee of the whole at 7:45. Okay. It is 7:45.
Yeah, go ahead, Julian.
Hit record. All right. Oh. Okay. All right. There we go.
Well, let me put my face in there.
Oh, do you need help?
Yeah,
Where
oh man,
where are you? Oh, there you are.
I'm lost in space.
Oh, whoops, sorry. There you are. You moved. Sorry. I muted you by accident. There you go. There we go.
Okay, do we have everybody then?
I believe so.
Let's see. Yeah, looks like everybody's present.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we might as well go ahead and get started then. I'd like to go ahead and call the committee of the whole together. As mentioned last night, the committee of the whole is presided over by the President Pro Tem, the regular council president does the regular council meetings. Julie, go ahead and do roll call if you would, please.
Hold on, I got somebody coming in. The mayor's iPad's coming back in. Okay, hold on. All right, there we go. Ms. Alt,
Here.
Mr. Bodkins. I see a blank screen. Ms. Earlston. Where'd she go?
She's there, but she's muted.
I thought I had muted here. I'm sorry.
Okay. Dr. Fellner.
Here.
Mr. Ivy.
Here.
Mr. Richard.
Here.
Mr. Triplett.
Here.
Mr. Bodkins.
Here.
We got everybody.
Okay, all the members of council are present. I'd like to also acknowledge our mayor, Mr. Tom Leary. Also we also have out there is our auditor, Mr. Baldinger, as well as our treasurer, Mr. Sparks.
Council President Watt too.
My apologies, and Council President Watt is also present. Also, the Safety Service Director, Nikki Ward, is here with us tonight also. I'd also like to welcome the members of the Port Authority. I see, and please forgive me if I miss somebody or mess up a name. I see Mr. Kent's out there, Mr. Frankhouse, Mr. Miller, also Mr. Steger, is that correct? I hope. And then also Mr. Trish and Ms. Garvik. Welcome to the meeting tonight. The agenda for tonight is the Free Center. We're going to try to focus more on the operational tonight. And having said that, if I could have a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll make that motion to approve the agenda.
Dr. Fellner made the motion. Mr. Aaron or Mr. Ivy seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The agenda is approved. I would say let's just go ahead right into any questions tonight based on the operation of the Free Center. If anybody would like to start, go ahead, please.
Okay, I guess I'll ask a question, Mike. What's your plans for operations for the freeze if you're supposed to lose money for the first 3 years?
So that was part of the sources and uses discussion that we had last night. It's part of that overall budget that we have prepared, from the construction and the infrastructure. We have allotted funds to cover those shortfalls for the first 3 years. So we've put that into the forecast for the budget. It's part of the financing the finances that we're going to raise pre-opening, so that those funds are already in place to get us to sort of bridge that gap until we get to the point where the facility can actually make money.
Chad, then question, you're saying that you're looking for, you'll budget for a 3 years on that? Okay, you know what that amount is specifically?
Gary, can you help me out with the dollar amount exactly on that one?
Yeah, it's $243,778.
For,
Year one, right?
No, those are all 3 years.
All 3 years, okay.
First year is 148,792. Second year is 90,723, and the last year is 4,263. If you have the pro forma, it's on page 9. That's the EBITDA down towards the bottom.
right. Now, I've got it in front of me. Now you're looking at a, as you call it, the acronym EBITDA.
Yes.
Negative 148.72 for the first year, supposedly 90,000 approximately for the second, 4,000 for the third year.
Yes.
I guess my follow-up question would be, okay, this per forma, I see that it's looked like it was generated through SFA, but what's the base line amounts for this that generates these numbers? Where do those come from? You understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, I think so. If you look up the page, Mike, first of all, you have your revenues. In year one, you're looking at 817,390. And then you've got what they call cost of goods, which is the costs associated specifically to those revenues. And if you go down towards probably 2/3 of the page, you'll see a total cost of goods sold, which is 259,909. So 817 minus that, 259,909 gives you that gross margin of 557, 481,000. And then you'll see where you have facility expenses, operating expenses, management payroll, payroll taxes, benefits, bonus. That's called total operating. So you go back to the gross margin, the 557, 481, and minus the 706 gets you the negative 148, 792. So it's a function of those total revenue lines, total cost of goods, less the total cost of goods, less the total operating gets you to that negative number. And that carries across all 5 of those first 5 years.
Right. I know how to read it. I guess I'm not.
So maybe, Mike, let me take a stab at this one because I think I understand your question. So SFA as a company actually owns or I don't know if they own any, but they operate a lot of these facilities across the country. So they have developed this pro forma. These numbers are generated based upon what they feel like is a expected usage of the facility of this size. So they took the size of the facility, the programming that was available, assigned certain costs to those programs, assigned certain revenues to those programs, and assumed that the facility would be used a certain number of times a year for however many tournaments. I think this one was 26 weeks a year, 26 weekends. And so that's where the basis for the numbers is coming from. It's coming from their experience in running these facilities.
Right. Well, okay. So, but I guess my question is, too, is then, the reason why I'm asking these questions in regard to this is because these are just numbers unless you've got a base point or some type of generation point from which they came from originally, how these numbers were put together from, I guess the best way to place it. Because you have a list of course, soccer, football, yada, yada, yada. So SFA, did they take into consideration our locality here in Galion, Ohio, or is this a United States wide? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do, Mike. And probably the best thing to do if you guys have this in front of you is look at page 20. That's kind of the breakdown between volleyball revenue and expenses. And at the bottom, they give notes of like Mansfield YMCA for this particular session. That is note 1, it's $35 per season, per session, one session. There's a group called Courts for Sports here in Ohio, Pinnacle Sports. They have Gallion Middle School. They charge $40 per week for 2 half days. So it's a various elite volleyball training center, Toledo Volleyball Club. So they called around the state and got those reference points that you're referring to. And then they built based on a utilization that Chad was referencing further back in the document. That's page 36. So as you move from the back to the front, what I was walking you through with that EBITDA, all of that tallies up to that front page. So all the details behind it, they are using local price points. So.
Okay, okay.
Hey, Mike, can I jump in? Oh, Tammy's got a question for a while. Questions about 32, but go ahead, Tammy.
Oh, okay. I'm just kind of following along with what Mike was saying. So when you were saying they came up with how they came up with these numbers and things, they do take into consideration Crawford, that it is Crawford County and not another one. They don't look at just one county. They look at a lot of things all across Ohio to kind of come up with these numbers. Is that correct? I just want to make sure I understood that.
I think that's fair.
Okay, so
Comps.
just looking over it kind of closely, like I know Gary was mentioning last night how they did, how this operational expenses is a little conservative with revenue, would you say? Because
I made a general statement about pro formas. I'm not saying.
Okay.
In accounting, you're always trying to be conservative, especially in these early stages, you know, overstate expenses, understate revenues, because there's things that you don't know until you actually start the game. I kind of compare it to a football game. I mean, you start with a pregame plan, you go out in the first half, you execute, maybe you were on, maybe you weren't, you make adjustments at half. That's kind of how I look at a pro forma.
Okay, all right. Because I was just, you know, looking over it and trying to think about, you know, just like under revenue, like in the first year, almost 20,000 on birthday parties. So, you know, that's where I'm like, is that number coming from something they expect out of Gallion or Crawford County? Or is that a number that they would expect from like Toledo, you know, you mentioned Toledo or, you know, something like that. Just those kind of things are kind of jumped out at me.
Yeah, so the birthday party question came up with the Chamber of Commerce, so must be a hot topic. And
Was that on the second one? I only saw the first one, so I must have missed that one.
Yeah, so it's like $200 a session. And I can tell you, like, I was talking with Steve Bridgeford after that chamber, and he said, shoot, KFC Hall in Attica is $350. So, you know, I think, yes, it does take into consideration. I think when you go over to the carousel, you'll see comparable, if not higher numbers. And I had even said on the chamber question, you know, what does that include? You know, it's 20 kids, $10 a kid. Does that include pizza, pop, the plates, the napkins? So, I mean, I think it's a little low myself, but
okay,
we'll find out.
Yeah.
The rate of increase, if I might, Mike, I don't want like a dueling thing here, but some things need to be discussed when we're at them. I think I'm more inclined to be skeptical about that. We rent a lot of facilities, the city does. They aren't the same thing. I get that. But my concern is how you move from 19,000 to 30,000 in 5 years. It's a tremendous growth in, I think some of the revenue centers grow. I think they're reasonable as you go down through the revenue side. Birthday parties is maybe a low hanging fruit, but I think it's, you know, you're going from 20 to 30,000 in 5 years. I think that's something that you know, that I had questions about, but I think the whole issue, if I might, Mike, I'll go ahead, 817 to 3.3 million is a tremendous. We have a handful of people who run businesses currently or have been in business in the past. That is a tremendous growth, a tremendous growth. I hope those expectations are met. And that revenue really has a lot to do with erasing the operating deficit. So I think I'm going to suggest now and throughout this meeting that we look at refining and going through a fair number of these estimates and numbers so that we develop a little bit greater comfort.
Anybody else have a question right on? Go ahead, Tammy.
Well, I don't really have a question, but I'm just going to make the statement that those are things that I can kind of look at and it just kind of jump out at me. But on the expense side, I look at that and those numbers I don't know, I don't have any idea what an expense for that would come to. So I don't know,
Sure.
kind of speculating what I would imagine. So, so it's
So
just.
If I may just make a point about the pro forma, I think we also have to look at this with the understanding that this is a best estimate that was prepared for this project, just to see if it was feasible financially. Okay. There have been no decisions made at this point in time as to who's going to run the facility or what it's going to look like. The other thing you have to remember about this pro forma is it is assuming that SFA is going to run the facility and that we are going to pay the expenses for their salaries and bonuses and everything that they've included in there. So again, this isn't something that's set in stone. This isn't something that isn't going to be refined. To the mayor's point, I think it needs a lot of revision. It is, though, something that we can look at and say, it is something that is doable in Galion, Ohio, based upon the revenues they've projected and the expenses that they might have. So I think that's the approach that I've taken to the pro forma, because I think it needs a lot of work to make sure that it fits this facility. Because again, we need to make the decision together, if we build this, how it's going to run, who's going to operate it, and what those overall expenses really are going to look like.
And just to make sure that I'm kind of on the same page with you, that could potentially make a huge difference in the operating cost.
It could make a difference in the operating costs. And from our discussions last night, it could make a big difference in the revenue side of things too, depending on where we end up with who pays what to use this facility. So, if there, are days or times where there aren't any contributions coming in, maybe as a group we decide we think $200 is too much for a birthday party, we want to make it less. Those are all things that are going to affect this. So this is just sort of a basis of, if we're operating a facility of this nature in Galion, could it make it, basically?
Any council members have a question? I've got a couple of them. I'm gonna yak for a minute once I get the floor.
Okay, let me, Doc Fellner, you want to jump in there? You're muted, sir.
I want to allude to something the mayor said yesterday, in that participation of the local YMCA in conjunction with this project, looking at it as not a partnership necessarily, but certainly not mutually exclusive in terms of running it. So that offers a little more of a local control. I would also imagine a reduction in the expenses of the operations, bonuses, et cetera. I would bet that the running of the operation from this corporation, they have a business plan So I think a cooperation again with the Y and some local entities would certainly be on the table, I would hope. Just no question, just a comment.
Okay, Ms. Alt, Kara?
So I have a couple of questions written down that kind of go along with this conversation. That kind of we're talking about employees and management and running it. The first question I have written down is, would employees be paid by the port or would they be paid by the city of Galion?
Port.
The port.
The port, yeah.
Okay. Will they have the benefits, retirement, et cetera, that would be kind of consistent with what's going on in the area? Okay. And then since the port is going to be taking on that responsibility, do you guys have someone already that does HR, payroll, insurance, or would that be another position that would have to be created? And is that included in this budget?
So that's a very big question. So let's try to take it piece by piece. So the key there is going to be dependent upon how we choose to operate the facility. So if we hire a firm like SFA to run it, we'll be paying SFA. They will pay all the employees. They will take care of all of that jazz. Okay. So they will be a contractor basically of the ports. So if it's a company like them, or maybe the YMCA, which Dr. Fellner mentioned, that those payments will just go to the Y. If we choose to hire employees directly, then yes, we would be responsible for all of that. My belief would be that we would need to hire the director for the facility if we're going to choose to try to run it on our own, that has the capabilities of performing some of those tasks that you mentioned there. Ultimately, that's going to fall back on the port itself from a fiscal perspective to make sure that those bills are getting paid and that the payroll is being processed and all that. But yeah, we are also in search for a part-time director right now. I believe the finance committee just approved something related to that for our budget, so that individual from the port's perspective would help with those functions as well.
Okay. And then whenever I was looking at the positions created list in the pro forma, I saw that there are about 7 administrative positions and 13 management positions. And then there were a variety of like instructors and referees and trainers. Are you kind of thinking that the instructors and the referees, trainers will be paid on 1099s, or how are you kind of seeing that going? Because those are going to be kind of as needed employees to keep the cost down. Have you guys thought about that at all?
Yes. Personally, I think that number is really high, first of all. I don't think that we need 13 management positions for this in Galion, Ohio. But yes, if possible, we would look at independent contractors for those, especially the referees, clinics, things like that. That would be absolutely doable. Obviously, you have to always be conscious of that line that you have to walk between independent contractor and employee, and what constitutes that relationship. And so we'd have to look at that on an individual basis from person to person to see, make sure that we are doing things the right way.
Okay. And then the next one that I had written down, we've kind of talked about, and it seems like you're still deciding, is are you leaning more towards professional management or local? So that one kind of answers that. And then the other question that I had is, will there be kind of like a governing board for the Free Center, or would that kind of stick with the Port Authority? So would you have a board to kind of look at procedures, hiring policies, or would that stick with the Port Authority?
I would absolutely hope that we have a board that runs this facility, and that we would look for. I'm sure there would be participation similar to a lot of committees or maybe CRA Housing Council, things like that the city does, where there's board participation, but that we would get members of the community to participate on the board, especially local business owners, to help with the partnership that we discussed last night between maybe uptown businesses and this Free Center.
Okay. All right. So those were my questions just on that portion. I've got more listed that I think we'll probably get to the subjects later.
Tom, did you have some questions you said?
I wanted to, page 9 has a number. There it is, page 9. That is it's down near the bottom operating expense, 150,272. Okay, and then if you track back to 32, that's where the question is. So 135 is the estimate, and you can see that grows a little bit over the estimated first 5 years. On 32, there's one question here that I think is a relatively important threshold, and that is SFA. I don't believe the port, but SFA has assumed 100% tax abatement. Speak to that, please.
A 100% property tax abatement, is that what you're talking about, Mr. Mayor?
Sure. So that's the assumption. I'm not sure the ports sort of had a conscious, yeah, we really love that suggestion of SFA, but that's SFA in my wise guy commentary on caution about taking this and lifting their recommendations. So somebody, I'm not sure, but a software program assume they get 100% abatement. That goes back to last night's question about the school. There are a whole lot of issues there. And so I just, is that something that needs to be discussed, or is
Yeah,
the
I
port?
think so. I think there's discussion there.
Yeah, it's big.
In the source and use, we've got about $1.6 million that we're planning to raise for the infrastructure, roads, water, sewer, electric. So having that investment, since we're going to pay for it, we're not using TIF. I think that's going to involve some discussion.
I think that's where, back to the discussion, that's where the we is both the port and the city. So I think the operating plan needs to be fleshed out with both entities. And we didn't spend much time last night, quite honestly, on that sources and uses. Could have spent another half hour on it. But many of those sources beyond the freeze ask are things that the state and the city and the port are going to have to work collaboratively on to bring to the table. So anyways, the question is tax abatement. Is it, is 100% abatement off the table, or is that it's like the beer issue last night, probably shouldn't have been on the pro forma.
I think it's something that needs to be discussed because this is a revenue generating asset. So it's not immediately eligible for tax abatement. So it's definitely something that needs to be discussed, I think, between all of us, but I think that the schools also need to be a part of this conversation when it comes to a tax abatement. I think that, to Gary's point about the infrastructure, I think the use of the facility by the schools is also another good, if you would call it selling point, but a good selling point for the schools for a discussion around a tax abatement.
It's a situation to Carter Crossing. I think that has to go through the process, application, CRA committee. You guys have built a great system at City Hall. So I think it's an eligible project, but obviously we have a chance to have more internal discussions, which is, one of the benefits of the port being such an arm of the council.
Well, oh man, Mike, I'm going to try one more time. It's really kind of you could sign off and allay any concern that there'll be, because if you were to add, if there were no tax abatement, that would increase roughly the operating cost from 135 to closer to 200,000. I say roughly because we don't know what tax value will be assigned to the building once it's built. So that's a big number. And although it doesn't escalate over the 5-year period, it would be that same amount. I think it's an important, it needs to be understood whether it's an operating expense or not. If it's $20,000 or something, I wouldn't bring it up. but it is early on, it's a pretty big consequence.
I agree with that, Mr. May, and that kind of goes back to my point earlier about this being, best guess from SFA. The details of the operating plan need to be fleshed out dramatically from this point forward. I think where we have, as the port anyway, has focused the vast majority of our efforts is into the design phase of the building and trying to come up with the construction budget. Just to be completely candid with this group, I am obviously more than willing and heavily invested in the operations piece too. But if we're not going to build the facility, I'm not going to spend the thousands of hours it's going to take to get this thing, the operations plan ready to go. Okay. So to me, I'm looking at this SFA pro forma as a guide. It's a starting point. Where do we jump off? Do we need to look at taxes? Yes. Do we need to look at whether or not there's a liquor permit? Yes. Do we need to look at whether or not birthday parties are too high? Yes. We need to look at all of those line items and still make sure that this is feasible. But I think the first major thing is we need to know that we can try to come up with the funds to build it. And if we don't have that commitment that we were talking about last night, not to be flippant, but what's the point of fleshing out the operating plan in that level of detail if we're not even going to build the facility?
Well, I think, I don't want to get argumentative, Mike, but I got to respond. I think that's, if you look at the questions that were asked and you were asked of them, so you remember them, you and Gary did at the Q&A for the chamber, and many of the questions that have been sort of put in a digest form by council clerk from the surveys that came in, the paper surveys and internet. There are a lot of questions about the operation. So I get this chicken and egg thing or cart before the horse. You need the commitment on the capital, but I sense strongly that to get the necessary votes, some of those community questions, and I think probably questions in council members' minds, it's legit to ask those questions and add those answers into their final decision. So I hear what you're saying, but the proposers of 11, almost $12 million worth of capital expenditure, we got to have better answers on that if you expect the council to strongly embrace this. So that's why I'm asking the questions.
Well, I mean, I go back to infrastructure, Tom, like we're planning to raise $1,600,000 for infrastructure. So if we do that, I'm willing to pay if council were to take that on and cover that, where I don't have to find that as a source, I mean, that brings our costs down significantly. I think paying property tax, in those years 1 through 5 is very fair because that simplifies the upfront process.
Well, I mean, this gets into stuff that's so technical. I'm not going there, Mike, but I would say that
We're there. That's what we're doing.
If the partnership executive director wants
Oh, that was nice.
do that or not. I mean, my question is when you look at the pro forma, we didn't spend, on the sources and uses, hundreds of thousands of those dollars are reliant on the city's cooperation. That's all I'm saying. So maybe I misunderstood what you were saying about, well, if the city wants to go out and get that money, you won't worry about that. But I hope I misunderstood. That's not what you were saying.
I was saying we were working in collaboration the whole time. I just felt like it wasn't being reciprocated.
What the world are you talking about? We're trying to give you $5 million and the money above the Freeze Center will be accessed largely if the city wants to go ahead and do that. And you can look at, I don't have that list out, but it's Vibrancy, it's 629. It's a bunch of state programs, and those dogs hunt if the city is part of the hunting party.
Yeah, you're right. I get it.
Okay, so
it's $12 million to you put in 5 and 12's raised. It's a good deal.
Gentlemen, I think Mark
really
had
the notion that where's that other money come from?
right.
Well, you just said it. State Capitol Bill, Timken, Vibrancy, DSA Tourism, sponsorships, state infrastructure bank. I heard you guys talking about that earlier. That's part of the equation. There's some capital campaign.
All right.
12 million.
We're gonna agree to we're gonna agree to that it has, I agree, it's a collaborative partnership. The city is going to have more than $5 million in this thing. And it's
And we'll put in 7.
who's we?
The collective group. 7 and 5 is 12.
That includes the city.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, hey, can I go, Mike? I gotta keep the floor for one more minute, and I want to point out the salaries. It was mentioned a little bit before that drive this pro forma. It goes to kind of Chad's. I understand why we bought the pro forma. I believe council that's gonna go ahead and send more money to Experience Galleon. They wrote a big check to pay for this pro forma. So it's, again, those are collaborative dollars, we'll call them. But anyways, those salaries, is everybody on the port and everybody on the meeting? Those seem, when the issue was made, those seem to be not in the Crawford County labor market, but maybe I'm just used to working for less. Those are dollar salaries.
If you go to page 33, if everybody has that, I think that's been brought up before. Let's use year 2 where we actually have all 7 people in management. It comes to like $336 or $336,800 divided by 7 is $48,000 on average. That's about $23 an hour. So as that compares to the living wage in Crawford County.
Mark, you had your hand up. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I just got a question. You know, you guys are wanting us to commit to ask the Freeze. Has anybody asked the Freeze board if they're all on board with this?
So we have had discussions with individual board members. We have an invitation from them to meet with the board and their financial advisors. So that's something that we are going to put in place. Again, I think it's, partly, I guess our philosophy is that back to the mayor's analogy of the cart before the horse. I think that the domino has to be an agreement from the city that this is something that you're willing to look at. Again, back to your question last night, Mark, and maybe to allay some of the concerns here, if the operating plan, when we get into it and dig into it, and if it doesn't make sense, we're not going to spend the $12 million. That would be absolutely insane for us to do that. So again, that's another piece of it. But I think that we want the support of council. That's why we sought out these meetings, and we wanted them is to get your backing to say, if everything comes through. So if the port can get the rest of the money in cooperation with the city from these state programs and individual donors, if we can get a solid operating plan that everybody's comfortable with, and we know that 5 years down the road, this facility is going to start earning revenue, that it's not going to be a colossal failure, then we can move forward with the project. And I think then the obvious, the Freeze Foundation, the schools all become part of that conversation after we get the city's backing.
Carrie, you had a question?
I did. I kind of wanted to also talk a little bit about the salaries and that. I think sometimes that they look high.
You're muted, Kara.
Sorry. I think that the salaries look a little bit high, but I think that whenever we're talking about the kind of people that we're going to want to get in to do that, I think that those look right to me. I think that, whenever we're looking for someone to come in, maybe with a master's degree in sports management or sports administration, it may not be someone that we're going to want to pay less than a pretty livable wage. And I would imagine that those first couple of years, that salaried position is really going to be pushing hard. It's not going to be 40 hours a week. Some weeks it's going to be 60, 70 hours. And I think that, to look at that Some of it looks high, but I think also, those are things that we can kind of look at and see whenever we're looking at that. Is this comparable to other positions in the area? If it's not, can it go up or down? So that was kind of just off of that. But since we kind of got started talking back about investment and all of those things, one of the questions that I had is for the private investors. Are you guys going to be taking any investors who would invest money with any kind of certain expectation? So if we had private citizen A who wanted to invest $2 million, but they wanted a 20% stake of the company, would you accept that money? What would that look like? And that may be a really specific question, but that would be a question. That's one that I have.
That's a very specific question, and that would be something that we'd have to explore in a lot of different from a lot of different aspects. So that's not something that's ever been discussed. No private individuals ever approached us, and I don't know anybody who has $2 million that wants to take an ownership interest. I think it becomes even more complicated than that, Kara, though, too, because now you're talking about a public-private partnership where you have a private entity that's making money off of the facility. As the Port Authority is a government entity, we have the same sort of rules that the city does. And so then I think it even complicates things further when you look at the use of freeze funds. Because, now the city would be committing freeze dollars for the benefit of a private citizen, potentially. And I think that would create some serious conflict. So I'm not sure that unless that investment was a lot larger, that it would work. Now, one thing that we have considered is we have considered a public placement of the bond issuance. Okay. So right now we're looking at what's called a private placement where the Freeze Foundation buys all these bonds. One of the big driving factor behind that strategy is that the interest rate for those bonds can be much more beneficial to the city ultimately, who's paying for the bonds. In other words, the interest rate will be much lower. When we examined the public placement of that, so in other words, going out and selling these bonds to private individuals or maybe a bank or something like that, you run into a couple of hurdles. One is the port doesn't have any way to guarantee this debt, so it'd have to be the city's guarantee ultimately. I don't believe the city is currently credit rated or has a bond rating. So, our advisors, municipal advisors, felt that it would increase the interest rate by at least 50%, maybe more, on what these bonds would be have to be sold at in the open market. So, that would just increase that interest expense to the city. So I think that's maybe a long answer. I hope it wasn't too much there.
No. And kind of what brought that up was whenever I was looking at the other facilities around Ohio, I saw that there's like an average between 40 and 60 sponsors for each one of these facilities. And some of them had private investors listed. So that's kind of what sparked that for me. So like this Kids America, that one didn't have any private investment, but it had 57 sponsors, business sponsors from around the area. And the numbers were kind of similar with all of these different facilities. So that's kind of what sparked that for me, with just talking about, what kind of businesses or individuals would invest and what would that look like. So if it's just an investment into the community and saying, here's this money, I think that's great. And it seems like that's kind of what Timken has done, and those different places. So
if I could jump in real quick, because there are two sponsorship levels that are defined out in this source and use. It's two $500,000 sponsorships. One is what I'm calling the court side, and one is what I'm calling the turf side. So an event at the Freeze Center on the such and such healthcare turf, and they would get signage on the walls. They would probably have signage in the turf. And that would be about the most that they would get out of it. And then that would be just marketing to hopefully the participants that are there will use those facilities. And then capital campaign, which ultimately adds up to about $672,000. Those are really the only two asks of the community. The rest is what Tom referred to as state entities, from Timken to Community Foundation to vibrancy to DSA. So, you know, within that 672, there could be some smaller sponsorship levels. That is what Kids of America does. So I think that's been a thought.
Okay. And then I think I might have one more written down for that.
Go ahead, Kara, if you do.
I don't think so. I think that was it for the investment part. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Mark, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I got a what if question. I'm not a banker and I'm not, a business person, but if I went to the bank to get a loan to start a business, don't they require a business plan that is solid before they loan you the money?
Yes.
Okay, so do you really consider this to be a solid business plan right now with all these unanswered questions? I'm just asking, Gary.
I think it's investor grade pro forma. I mean, that's what we contracted SFA for. And Chad can speak from a banking standpoint in terms of what he would typically see with a pro forma. I think it's pretty detailed. It's pretty elaborate. You could take a narrative and put it to it. But, I think in the end, what the bank's looking for is, can this cash flow?
Yeah, I would agree. So the one thing I would say to that, Mark, is we've had a lot of discussions. I know the mayor and I have had a lot of discussions about this pro forma as well. I think it needs adjusted. And so what I'm saying to you all tonight is this isn't the final version, because, I think that there are some cost savings potentially to us in who we end up operating this facility. The SFA pro forma is heavily driven on SFA making money out of operating this facility. And now they have a solid business plan to do it, and they've done it very successfully across the country. But their 7 management positions are going to be 7 sales positions. Those people are going to be out there driving tournaments into this facility, and so that's how they're going to make their money based on those bonuses. So SFA is, I would guarantee you, is very experienced, seasoned in making these pro formas so that they fit the needs of the individuals who are building them. For us, for the Galleon Port Authority, there would be, I don't know, maybe dangerous to say this, but there would be no level of pro forma that would allow us to go to a bank and get financing. Okay. We have never owned or operated any facility like this before. If we walked into a bank and asked them for $12 million to build one of these, they would laugh at us, really, I think. So this has to be done with, this public input up, because I don't think there's a way it gets financed privately, just to be fair. Now, if a company like SFA wanted to build one and run it, they would have a lot stronger track record in actually doing this, and they would therefore get more weight put on that pro forma that they're putting out there. What I use this as is, I understand what they do, the nature of their business. They're experts in this type of business. They've done it very successfully. So I am taking a little bit of a faith-based leap, saying, okay, these are the numbers they put out there, and it looks like it makes sense. Can we make it work for Galleon?
Tammy?
I just was looking over the questions that Julie had sent us, and you guys have really answered most of them, but there was a couple that I just kind of wanted to address. One, and these may be things that you guys haven't thought of yet, that are further down the road. For example, one of them was, have you guys thought about transportation? Would any transportation be provided for due to location? Like I said, this was kind of farther down the road, but I did ask that, and I thought that's kind
that
of
would be great.
Uh-huh.
I don't know how that happens currently, though. It's not like either the city or the port has a fleet of buses to take people anywhere currently. So
who are we talking about transporting?
Kids to the facility, I think.
Yeah.
From the school, directly from the schools?
Yeah.
or from, even from the city, like kids from the other, maybe the other opposite end of town where it's located, or, and, I don't know if the school would be able to do anything like that after school for sports programs or.
I think there's a possibility of that, Tammy. One of the things that, because that question's been asked before, and I don't know that there's a real good answer to it, just because we don't have any infrastructure or programs in place for transportation currently. And I think that the one thing I would mention, though, from being somewhat involved in youth sports in Galion, is the parents they find a way to get their kids to the events, and if they can find a way to get their kids to the schools, and the kids aren't walking to the schools for basketball practice, their parents are bringing them. I think the key question there is that sort of after school, post people getting off of work time period that we all struggle with. The wonderful practices that start at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, like who can get their kid to that? But I think that's the real key question. I think that's something that needs to be worked out.
Chad, I just thought of something, the Y, and this is the opportunity with the partnership with the Y. They always had the latchkey that took kids from the schools to the Y. And one of I think the positives of this center that we talked about yesterday was the fact that now kids can practice right after school instead of 7:30 at night. So, to be able to tie that in is a wonderful opportunity and a discussion with the schools. That is the main reason we're doing this in the first place, that it is used locally.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. And then one other one that I'm sure has probably been touched upon before, but just like I said, I wanted to kind of address some of the questions that we received. And one of them is, how do you plan on marketing the facility? Probably just outside of Galion as well as in town.
The keys there is in that executive director hire, which has the biggest number of the 7. It needs to be someone that's well connected with AAU, with travel volleyball, soccer, because they themselves know the president of the Ohio Regional Volleyball or the director of AAU. And, to be in front of those people and be known, that's key. I mean, I was up at Massillon back in January because my son plays for OSU Strikers. And Ian is the director of that club. That same son was at Mount Union this week for recruiting, and they're like, well, who's he play for? Well, he plays for the Strikers. Oh, we know Ian. So Ian has all the connections. And I told Ian about this, and he was just amazed. He said, so we don't have to go to Mentor, Ohio to play in the middle of winter. How fantastic would that be to be right here on 30? So it's those connections validate the salary, but there is money built into this. It's pre-operating costs. It's part of the startup costs that we shared with you. Yes, those 3 years of losses are in there, but there's also a marketing budget be in those venues spaces. I mean, it's not that we just put it on, the local radio station. I mean, it has to be very targeted.
Mm-hmm. So that ties very closely in with who we get in there to as executive director to promote and make those connections. So okay.
Yeah, it's not sometimes what you know, but who you know. A lot of times it makes a bigger difference.
Okay, thank you. Those were just a couple of the questions that I saw that I felt most of the other ones I think were addressed. So thank you.
I've got some questions now. I've been listening to everybody, we've had quite a few good questions. I want to kind of piggyback on Mark's and the mayor's questions, kind of, and this is more for Chad, I guess. One question and point would be is, as was brought up by Mark, I believe, if you went to a bank and you said yourself that they would essentially laugh you guys out the window. But I'm from a business background. To me, without having the operational end of this put together, I'm kind of perplexed on how you will be able to, for lack of a better term, sell this to possible any type of money other than maybe going to like the Freeze, to us, council, to Timkins and stuff like this. I'm perplexed on how you're going to be able to do that without doing some of that legwork in the back end.
We're not. The answer is we're not. My point wasn't that we're not going to do that work. My point is that that work needs to begin in earnest as soon as we have the council's commitment to be a supporter of the project. Okay. I think it's something that happens simultaneously.
But hey, Chad, but if we treat the council as a investor, the city as an investor. So I'm an investor, you're coming to me with a proposal and you want me to invest funds of $5 million into a project that you haven't quite worked out all the details in on the backside. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of variations, especially off this pro forma. For one thing, I'm kind of wondering, you know, the revenue end of this thing has a lot of good numbers in it, but let's face it, I'm hearing basically from you guys that you really haven't actually gone out and shaken the trees for the AAUs and all these other organizations, and they just didn't pop up yesterday. They've got contracts with other facilities, commitments. I mean, I'm kind of wondering where you think that suddenly, I mean, I'm sure some of it's going to be there, but the expenses will definitely be there. You'll have the utility costs, you'll have the employment costs for this facility. And that's not even talking about what we were talking about last night, which was the actual freeze money to be repaid, the bond issue. So I guess one of you guys want to mention that, or, I mean, I'm kind of.
So I'll take that on. So the great news is I'm not asking you to write us a check for $5 million today. I'm asking you to give us some formal, you know, proclamation of support so that we can start exploring those other things. You know, I'm not expecting the money to be transferred to the Port Authority on good faith that we're gonna work on this. I think that these meetings are about getting some type of official backing for the project from City Council. To your point, for the revenue side, I'm quite confident that we'll be able to meet the 26 weekends. You know, I know you have experience with it's not a travel sport, but it's just travel. We'll call it travel dance. I've got experience with travel dance. You know, we're in different venues every year. Those companies move around from one venue to the other, and there's a significant amount of money that parents pay to watch their kids do these things. So yes, there is always going to be a leap of faith. Yes, there's always going to be a risk. If you know, you're not going to have a guarantee for anything. What we're proposing from an investor, from the city standpoint, is the potential economic impact that this can have to Galion. And I know Gary's got better numbers on that, so I don't know if you want to speak to that, but that's the benefit that the city gets for putting this, or I guess, dealing with this risk or backing this proposal, if you will.
Yeah, and I'd like to jump in on the question you had about reaching out to directors. In fact, we actually have. When we had the National Association of Sports Commission contract, Don Schumacher is well connected throughout the state and made calls throughout the state. That was part of the contract to determine the viability of another complex. So we did do that. And myself, Ron Wazinski, Tammy might recognize that name. He's the executive director of OVR. I specifically met with him up in Cleveland at an event a couple years ago, talked to him about how they operate. You know, they have standards where they come in and they rent a court for $7,000. So if you have 6 courts times $7,000, you've got $42,000 for the weekend. But he collects the revenue at the door. We get concessions. So we have made some of those connections. There's a gentleman over in Bucyrus that went down with Tom and I in a group to Cincinnati with Don Schumacher that does the Mid-Ohio Basketball League, is well connected with AAU out of Cleveland and Columbus. He texted me Tuesday morning just to find out, you know, wish some good luck with this conversation. soccer, that's a growing field in Galleon. But the good news about that is there isn't even an indoor facility in a 60-mile radius. I mean, you've got to go to Columbus or Medina. That's all there is. And I already mentioned to you, Ian out of Worcester, that's the biggest connection. So 3 connections right there. To the economic development point, we're asking for a $5 million endorsement, let's call it, to then turn around, raise the money, and provide a $12 million asset, which includes the infrastructure, the startup cost, but a $12 million asset that's going to produce between $1.9 to $2.9 million per year on average. I mean, you run that out 20 years because we like to talk about the life of the bond that's going to cost $7 million. That returns a $60 million in the community. I think that's a really good investment.
I saw a hand up. Ron, you have a hand up? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just, this pro forma, I think it's just a benchmark from what we can start from. And what Chad said, they're just wanting permission to go ahead so they can get the infrastructure, the money, go forward with this. It's whether you really want to do this or not that, and I want to appreciate, Rod Steiger, Gary, Chad, Eric, Brian and Deb for doing all this work, the 7 years of doing this work, and they've laid this out for us. And these are people, since I was a kid, I've known, in this community. So, I think we should trust them a little bit, and that we're not going to do something that we shouldn't do. And I think they have the same frame of mind as well. So that's all I got to say.
Well, I appreciate that, Rod, but, and I don't want anybody that's listening or that is part of this conversation tonight to misunderstand. My questions are generated by a respect for the fact that I, as a council member and other members on this council, represent the community of Galleon, the citizens. That includes all of us. And we have to be mindful that this is not our investment. This is the citizens of Galleon's investment. So my questions are based off of that information or that concern or approach. So, and this is not a reflection on anybody that's worked on this thing for all the years they've worked on it. I appreciate that. I think everybody that is on the council appreciates that. But I do also know that as a representative of the 3rd Ward, those folks out there want me to ask the pointed questions, the common sense questions. And that's what I'm doing.
So I do agree with you. We all have a fiduciary responsibility to do the best job that we can and go forward. We have that every day, whatever we do. And I think, have it in Gary's hands, the mayor's hands, finding these solutions out and not doing anything until we have these solutions. But they're wanting our commitment to move forward. So I think that's what they want to do. And they can't move forward without that commitment. And I agree with you, Mike, but I'm just talking out loud. So
all right.
I don't mean it. I don't mean anything mean to anybody. So
Doc Feldner, you had a question?
No, a comment that is going to kind of reiterate what Rod just said. We have to remember, we're asking specific questions, trying to look into a crystal ball 5, 10, 20 years in the future. And nobody has those answers. What the port is looking for, they haven't even gone to the Freeze Foundation yet to see if it's even possible. So I hear a lot of questions that my ears hear a lot of negativity. What ifs, the bad things that can happen. And that is a totally legitimate concern and questions. However, they're not asking for a check of $5 million. They haven't, we haven't even gone to the freeze board. They want a commitment that we want to take this first step. There's a lot of ways that this project will not go through well beyond this going to the freeze fund. That's the first step. If we say no to this, then it's a done deal and nothing's going to happen. And I think it's going to be a missed opportunity that the citizens that talk to me lament about. MTD didn't come here because we were made too many. I don't have the backstory on all of this. I'm just hearing comments. MTD didn't come here because we were too big for our britches. And Kroger didn't come here because who do we think we are making demands? I mean, I just think this is an opportunity, and it could go into the long list of ones that Galleon failed to do. And we're gonna, I think Gary made a great point last night. The numerator is gonna get bigger and bigger. Nobody likes their utility bills now, but guess what? They're not going down in the foreseeable future. And if we don't have a bigger numerator, or, then I just think this is a missed opportunity. They're asking for our support to go to the port for the first step. We got to remember that in the big picture, amongst all of the specifics about salaries, and those are important. Don't get me wrong. I trust Chad to bust to get those numbers done. But if we say no right away, why should he work, gratis and put in, like he said, thousands of hours in details if we're not going to, and I'll use the phrase that's reiterated before, if we're going to make the first domino fall the other way. That's all.
Hey, Mike, I got dumped out. Oh, Aaron's got some comments. I want to talk about page 6 if I could, because if people are going to start to summarize, everyone who has a vote on this needs to understand this page 6. It's not a small detail. It's 1.2 million. And so I think at some point, the council members need to understand and have an explanation how some of those, how you get to 1.2 million in soft cost operations. So I've been a fan of this. I'm one of the people that has been around this thing for 7 years, not a year and a half or so. So I'm not going to get cornered or leveraged into now you're against it. I'm not against it. But this pro forma does not provide enough information. And so if the trade-off is, okay, you guys, city, give us the permission to go forward on the 5 million, then I want some sort of commitment that the two public entities, the city and the entity that we form, the Port Authority, will sit down and work this out. That has to happen. That's not happened in the fashioning of the building. And so we can't go back there, but it's 1.2 million. And I'm as passionate about it. A lot of folks have worked hard to turn sort of the trend in Galleon. But to ask a few questions doesn't put you on the side of on the wrong side of that. And so thanks for letting me say that. If you don't know what everything in that 1.2 million is going to, then you ought to think about the vote and what you're going to do as a council.
Right.
$131,000 for pre-opening operational development and post-operation stabilization services. Wow, that's a mouthful of Florida consultant ease if I ever read it. $531,000 for pre-opening operation development and post-operating stabilization. whoever said that, I think it was Chad, he's right on about this SFA contract. The way it's set up is to make SFA a very profitable organization. Most of their clients aren't little old cities like Galleon. They're big players like Cedar Point, Sports Force. So maybe they can handle that, but $500,000, that's bigger than most our departments. Post opening stabilization services. Go figure.
Just to defend SFA, Tom was involved with me in deciding on choosing them. And they are recognized nationally as the largest, having the best benchmarks. And we've said from the very beginning that this needs to be massaged. It needs to be looked at. So I don't know. Yeah, page 6 needs looked at. We agree.
Hey,
yeah, Tom, if that was a question.
The buzz, like, yeah, I participated in from the day one when this came out in 18. I had problems with it. I've been upfront, hadn't changed much at all in 2 years. So I'm upset about it. I don't like being like roped in, like, oh, hiring them was, it's my fault or something. That's the silliest thing in the world. I think this thing has limited utility, and there's a lot to be done between the port and the city in developing an operating plan that satisfies this. If we went into a bank, they'd like this. I think those points were well made by other councilmen tonight. I won't pile on there, but
it was also made by the banker on the Port Authority.
Yeah. What? The idea of having the people together?
The idea of a collaboration and working the operating operating details out, that it was I believe I heard Mr. Miller say that repeatedly, and talking to the city about it.
I think that you're out of sequence. Excuse me, Mike. I talked with Mike about this 2 weeks ago, if he would serve on a group when we were kind of at loggerheads. So, I mean, I don't want to get into, I think that you have to have the right people from both the city and the port. And so the execution of that concept's the important thing for sure.
Gentlemen, I think there was a couple of council members, Mr. Ivy, we haven't heard from you tonight. Please.
I'll save my comments till the end.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Tammy, you had a question?
Well, just kind of to go off of Doc Feldner, I definitely am seeing both sides of everything that we're discussing right here. I hate to be lumped into being negative or that I'm on a negative side by asking questions. I think what everybody wants to do is just fully understand this, because just to move forward, we are going to probably be committing possibly or more than likely to a 20-year commitment. So that step moving forward, I think, as I've said before to, I think, Gary and other people that I've talked to, if someone in the community wants to ask me why I made the vote I did, I want to be able to fully explain. I voted yes for this because, and if I can't explain why I voted for this or why I chose to not vote for this, that's on me. I need to make sure I fully understand. So any question that I ask is coming from that point. I need to fully understand to make an informed decision, not because I'm negative and I don't trust this, or I don't think you guys didn't put enough into this, or any, I mean, to me, that's just silly. I think we all fully understand how much work went into this and how knowledgeable you guys are, which is why we are wanting to meet with you, because we know you guys have this knowledge. I think it's just a matter of, we need to understand so that we can make that informed decision, and we can justify it to whoever, wants our justification. Because as Mike was saying, we do represent the city. So And I understand that you guys aren't asking for the money out of our pockets right now, but if this does go forward, it is a 20-year commitment for the city possibly. So it is a big, it is a big thing. And we want to make sure we're just making the right decision. At least that's how I think most people are looking at this. So I don't want anyone to think our questions are because we're negative, or my questions are because I want to catch you guys, don't know what you're doing. And that's just silly to me. That's just silly. It's really fully because I want to be informed and I want to make an informed decision. So I hope you guys understand that. I just wanted to really point that out. So thanks.
Doc Fellner, go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to apologize for the use of the word negative in that. I couldn't think of a better word. I completely agree that these questions are legitimate and need to be answered in the long run.
Eric, you had something to say?
More a question. The community has been brought up a few times about how we're trying to make a good decision for the community. I understand council offered a survey to the community recently. Can anyone speak as to the results of that? I know we have questions that were summarized from that, but can someone speak to that?
Really has all of the percentages and everything.
Aaron, you're muted.
I didn't know I was going to be on the, I'll look those
I'm
up.
sorry. Thank you. No, I just wanted to thank everybody. These surveys that came in were just a little bit over 800. And, as Mr. Earlston and I were speaking about tonight, this forum of the committee of the whole was really garnered towards that 15%, or about the 120, give or take, out of the 800 plus that were still uncertain about this project. Positively, over 60% of the people that were surveyed, 488, give or take one or two, have strong support of this project, and only about 24% to 25% of the 192, 195 votes are against it. If we just take the element of the uncertainties out and don't even assume that once everybody's well informed as part of that 15% that are uncertain about this, the support of this is at 70% or higher from our constituents. So I couldn't agree with Mr. Richard more, is that, 4 of us represent individual wards, but I think it's a fair statement that we're making important decisions like this for the city. We're thinking about the good of the city as a whole. And I really, truly believe that, as Ms. Earlston just alluded to, we have a duty as elected representatives to gather as much data as possible to make these informed decisions, but we also have the responsibility of advancing the will of our constituents. And, and piggybacking then off Dr. Fellner, that's why I jumped in, Mike, because I was like, wow, 1, 2, 3, and 4, now's a good time for me to finally speak. Dr. Felder made a great point last night. I don't know of anybody that's ever developed a business model or went into business for themselves that they don't project a loss in their first 3 to 5 years before the revenue streams start really kicking in. So unless this is an anomaly, I don't know how this proposal is any different than any other business model that's ever been created, including Mr. Freeze when he decided to bring his mortar company to Galion, in the early 1900s. And I do agree with Mr. Frankhouse from last night that this, it would stand to reason that a businessman who wanted a recreation hall in his will, would have the idea of having a business plan and a good business model behind it. I too had 2 kids that grew up playing travel ball. My daughter was in dance and cheer. She was in volleyball. We went to colleges and sat on courts in lawn chairs. We went to Massillon. We went to Columbus. We went all over the, I want to say the 8-county area and sometimes further. But I just wanted to reiterate that these surveys, they were very well needed, and the 15% that were uncertain about this project they deserve the courtesy and respect to have this explained to them, and that's why we're meeting here tonight and last night. But I'm not going to use exaggerative adjectives such as overwhelming support or anything like that. But when you're talking over 60%, over 2 to 1 that are in support of this project, including 90% or greater of our small business owners, just to get the extra traffic in town, to increase our tax base. And Gary used the example of the Golden Domino last night. I've been saying for several months, and I'll stop after this, Mr. Richard, that here's the only guarantee we have. If we don't put that golden domino in place, the only thing guaranteed to fall behind it is absolutely nothing. And Dr. Fellner was right as far as MTD. You can add Timken to that was turned away. You can add the Ohio State campus that was turned away several decades ago. Now, in hindsight, the Richland Mall was also turned away at one point in time in the 50s or 60s. And I just, I would hate to think of that the idea 50 years down the road, citizens are looking back going, what if? I have every confidence that this complex is going to get built somewhere between Upper Sandusky and Worcester. I just hope it's us. I mean, we've been starving for an opportunity like this. And I agree with Dr. Fellner that we're not writing a blank check or $5 million check next week. The Port Authority, who is an extension of our governing body, is just asking for an opportunity to go out there and shake the tree, so to speak. And, I have every confidence that this business plan that's been put together is fantastic. And the people that they've consulted with, the DePerna organization, is world-class. So I want to thank everybody for your time. Thank you for the port. Thank you for all these amazing questions. And I look forward to seeing what direction we go. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ivy, for your comment. Do we have any other questions out here tonight? Because I see that the time we're getting out to, it's 9 o'clock now.
There's a lot of shit.
Mike, did you want those numbers? I know that Eric asked for. I pulled all that out. I didn't know.
Go ahead.
All right. On the online surveys, it has 68.92% were yes, 20.84% were no, and 12.25% were unsure. On the surveys that we received in-house, they were 43.2% yes, 22.4% unsure, and 34.4% no. So that's, so just so you guys know, I did keep them separate because it kind of hit different markets and stuff like that. So
thank you, Julie. Anybody else have any questions for the port tonight? Well, if there's no other questions, I'd just like to say that it's been a very good discussion, good questions in my mind. I think everybody that's viewing this, as well as the folks at home, are all interested in making sure that our community moves forward. I hate to use that cliche, but so having said that, and if there's no other questions, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Mr. Tripp
I'll
made the
second.
motion. Mr. Ivy seconds it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. We are adjourned at 9:08. Thank you very much, everyone, including the port. And good night to everyone.
Good night, everyone. Thank you very much.